Welcome all. I'm here with my friend Kubilai, who is a philosopher. We're both in London, but of course we can't meet given the circumstances at the moment. Kubilai will introduce himself in a bit and we'll talk. We'll have a meandering, we have a proper peripatos. Peripatos, of course, to remind us of Aristotle. We will take a walk in thought and see where it leads us. If it leads us nowhere, so be it. So Kubilai, you have the stage. Introduce yourself to the world.
Hello, my name is Kubilai Ixel. I just completed an undergraduate in philosophy at McGill. I'm despite how I sound, I was born and I was raised in France. We moved to Istanbul when I was 15. I lived 3 years in Istanbul. I did high school, and then I went to Canada for university, and then I moved to London afterwards. So I have a diverse background. My father is Turkish. My mom's Iraqi-Hungarian. So I think that gives me quite a intercultural perspective on things, I would say.
And in terms of, go on.
Please.
Well, maybe the origin story is relevant or interesting, at least how we met. We met at a festival last year. And I think I walked up to you and said, "You look interesting." And then we spent an entire evening together drinking. And maybe that's a topic we'll touch upon, is friendship, is the importance of meeting people, and which we're no longer able to do now. And of course, what we always talk about is philosophy just itself. But wherever it takes you, what's on your mind?
What's on my mind? Well, right now, like everybody else, the crisis is on my mind. It's something that's new for, well, everybody who's alive, I don't think there's anyone alive today who remembers such a global pandemic in his lifetime. So I think that's on my mind, like it is everybody else. The uncertainty of the future is on my mind. I don't know what the world is going to look like in a post-corona time. I'm hopeful, but it seems like everything's been put on pause. It seems like the whole world is on a timeout. It's the referee called it a timeout, and we're all just waiting to kick the ball again. And it's frustrating that we can't. But Amazon still works, so we can still order books.
Yes. Well, if only people ordered books, right? That would be. Yeah. I mean, the big fear, of course, is that Amazon gets out of this as the winner, so Gestell takes over. But then again, the world is on pause. That's something that's crucial. Is that this has never happened. Pandemics have happened, yes, but the globalized world, this extremely interconnected and just-in-time delivery planetary factory has never been paused. And of course, there's a question how long it can be paused, or whether perhaps what we make of it is that the world pauses every year for a month. I wouldn't even mind that.
Yes. And the animals are coming back. The cities are being flooded by critters. They spotted dolphins in Venice. And it's funny how the natural world, if the world just pauses for a few weeks, sort of creeps back in. I find it interesting as well that it's the idea that the world has paused. Yeah. That says a lot about what we think the world is.
Yes.
Because the sun rises and goes to bed, and the seasons flow. Spring has come back, and the trees are burgeoning. In a greater sense, life goes on. But so what do we mean when we say that the world has been put on pause?
Yeah. That's an interesting phenomenological observation. Because when we say the world has paused, what we mean, it seems, is the economy, right? I mean, to a certain degree, it's more than just the economy, because literally everything has been shut down. Most businesses have closed, which has never happened. But yes, the world, but what is a world, right? Exactly. When you look at it phenomenologically, then world would have got something to do with meaning.
Mhm.
Has meaning paused? And one of the things you said to me a couple of weeks ago was, finally the world is going my pace.
Yeah, exactly. I do have terrible homestead inclinations, and for once everybody's forced to stay inside. It's so at least my indulgences aren't laced with as much guilt because I'm not missing out on everything that's happening outside.
But what do you think it says about that we say the world has stopped or been put on pause?
Well, I think the world is what happens when we cooperate towards goals, and that's been paused to a certain degree. I mean, people are still doing things at home. I know the teachers are trying to educate their kids through internet platforms. I hear that's going disastrously bad. I know I took Italian classes online because my high school didn't offer it in Istanbul. I just got an Italian girl to do all my homework. Uh, there's so many ways around education if there's not a teacher sort of forcing it down your mind. Unfortunately, kids don't really want to learn. They have to be, in a way, forced to learn, I think. Uh, so I don't know. I don't know how it's going, but I think since everybody's stopped making projects, that pretty much means the time out of the world for me. Projects, striving towards them. You know, I think any life worth living is made up of, in my opinion, two factors. The first one is to create meaningful bonds with people,
Yeah.
and that's very important. And the second one is to set difficult goals for yourself to achieve, increasingly difficult goals. So you climb a mountain, and now you want to climb a higher mountain, and there are no limits to the heights that you can reach. So I think that's the second element, to setting difficult goals for yourself and achieving them.
But do you think that people have stopped following projects now?
Mostly they've used Corona as an excuse to sort of halt their projects.
Or perhaps it's a moment where some begin to think about whether they want to continue pursuing their day jobs, their bullshit jobs, as some have called it. David Graeber has called it that, or rather do something more meaningful. Andrew Taggart, my friend, for example, says that the entire chit chat about meaningful work now shows itself to be futile. We need to have a completely different way of living,
Well,
a way of
wasn't it
making living.
wasn't it Heidegger that said that in the future man will want work to feel like entertainment? I think he said that in the question concerning technology. Uh, but I think that's very true. I think today people want their careers to feel fulfilling, or to feel enriching, or to feel like they are contributing to their personal development. I think work is work. Work is drudgery. Work is difficult. Work is not meant to be, fulfilling or fun. And it can be, I suppose, for a very select number of people in very select fields. But I mean, the streets will need cleaning. There's a lot, there's a lot of drudgery involved in the
Yeah,
upkeep of the world,
yeah,
and somebody's got to do it. Lest we replace everybody with machines.
which would be horrible in its own way,
Uh,
right? I would.
exactly, which is just another dystopian scenario. I
Yeah.
really don't. I really don't see how we can get rid of human drudgery. Uh,
No, I think yes. I think that's probably the problem. And but what is it? I mean, what could, this is speculation, of course. But what could the world look like after this? I mean, except for perhaps for an economic disaster that's perhaps happening. But
well, I think there's going to be a few months of just unbridled bacchanals. I think when people are allowed to see each other, there's going to be a lot of partying. There's going to be a lot of social gathering. It's going to feel quite ecstatic, I think, in the few months after the Corona crisis. And I expect there's going to be a economic acceleration after a while. You know, it's people have been eager to spend their money, eager to do things, eager to go out and
Yeah.
travel and spend, and it's been burning a hole in their pocket, I think. So I think, but in a larger sense, maybe the optimist in me thinks that we'll learn from this, because the global cooperation has been pretty good. The the transparency of information, the global aid. I think maybe this is it's teaching us to work together to solve global problems. Someone called it a dress rehearsal for the apocalypse. I read an article, and I thought that was pretty good. A dress rehearsal for the apocalypse. You know, what to do when actual irreversible difficult problems come. Like, what do we do when Venice is flooded? What do we do when all the coastal cities are under the sea? What do we do when resources are scarce? What do we when we start facing the music for this ecological disaster we've brought about? Perhaps some of the corona responsiveness will be ingrained in us. I don't know. It's just a thought.
But okay, I don't know about the politics, but in terms of, wouldn't it be wonderful if there could be a moratorium every year, that we all just do nothing for a month? Maybe that's possible. I don't know.
Enforced idleness, state enforced idleness.
No, not state enforced. Not state
Culturally,
enforced.
culturally encouraged.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Or idleness in general.
Uh-huh.
Slower pace, less travel. Less
Yes.
travel. Tourism is terrible. Less tourism, less travel, less monoculture. Look at what's happening in Italy, for example, is faring very badly because they have a complete monoculture of their entire industry, right? This is economics, but still, they have focused only on tourism, which is why they will be hit very badly by this economy. But still, philosophically, what's visible is one of the things he said about online teaching is not entirely true. I mean, I've had very good experiences teaching online, and it works quite well actually. But I think it depends on what kind of learning it is. If
And
it's
you've been teaching adults.
sorry,
You haven't been teaching little kids. You've been teaching
no,
adults.
yes, exactly. And I think also what's perhaps what the shift that's occurring anyways to some degree, completely unrelated to this crisis, is that when you teach adults online or in person when they're here where you are, then there's no longer this kind of instrumental rationality at work that you would get with students, for example, or pupils. Because what they come for is not, they don't come for a degree, right? They don't come for a grade. They don't come for the status that comes with going to university X, Y, and Z. So perhaps what I'm hoping for is a bit of a renaissance in terms of learning and studying and making, in that sense, the best use of the internet and its resources and possibilities, right? Maybe that's something that's being accelerated right now too.
I think it is. A lot of people are placing their faith in the internet as a didactic tool, if you will.
Yeah.
I think it has great potential. I just think it needs to be better structured, and it needs to have a certain real world clout or credibility attached to it, because that sort of it allows us to curate our content better. You know, if anyone can teach a class, let's say, without any sort of qualification, and if there's no hierarchy to the kinds of platforms where in which you get your information, you lose faith, I suppose, or you lose confidence in what you're learning. I think there is such a thing as a purpose to the clout provided by academia, or invested in those institutions, because it sort of tells us it sort of filters out the information that's given. I guess I'm not expressing myself clearly, but I'll put it this way. If I read an article written by Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, I'm pretty sure that whoever wrote that article has gone through all sorts of academic barriers.
Yes, I will have
And,
to say something about this though.
right. Okay. Well, feel free to respond. But I think that the information I'm given is indicative of some sort of academic consensus amongst
Yeah,
scholars.
well, consensus does not mean truth, right? So when you look at, for example, the Cambridge Companion to Being and Time, which is the pinnacle of academic publication, you will not find more, just in terms of pure scholarly mistakes, you will not find a book that has more mistakes. So for example, Ian Thompson, in his paper on death, claims that Heidegger quotes Jakob Böhme, which does not happen. Heidegger, in fact, refers to a play written by Johannes Treppel, which was called Ackermann aus Böhmen, the farmer's man from Böhmen. So this is one of the worst examples of bad scholarship. And I think what's happening, which is why the internet, if you like, is becoming more a place where people actually also from within institutions now go, is because you have, to quote Nassim Taleb, actual skin in the game. What you say, your words count. You are accountable with your face and your, to speak in neoliberal terms, your brand. And people who are at Cambridge and other places, they hide behind these. And by the way, anyone at this point can take a class at Stanford or any Ivy League university, by the way. If only Cambridge, Oxford, you pay £2,000-3,000, you can take a class. You could put that on your CV.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe internet is the future. It certainly democratizes the information a lot, and it makes it way more available. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. But what it does is you yourself, right? You begin to publish and say something, and then if it's any good, people will come. And it's kind of deinstitutionalizing everything. But then to come at this with Deleuze, it re-territorializes. So at first it deterritorializes, and then, but of course, it rearranges new structures, and then those become centers of authority.
Okay. Well, have there been in any academics of note, you would say that you know of, recent academics who have no university training whatsoever, who are fully internet autodidacts and have written a major piece of philosophy,
no,
major piece of contemporary philosophy? Well, one day there will be, I would imagine.
Yes, perhaps, yeah.
But it's what I guess I'm asking is internet the kind of thing which is conducive to the higher stratas of thought, or can it at best give you something of a vulgarization of philosophy, something of an introduction to philosophy? Like, I know nothing of biology, but I enjoy watching these videos on YouTube. Kurzgesagt. I don't know if you know this YouTube channel. They're very popular, like science channel, and they've got very well researched videos that sort of give you a little account of what cell reproduction looks like, or what a black hole imploding might look like, or what a dying sun might look like. And they tell you very interesting things about it, but it is a vulgarization. It doesn't.
Yeah,
doesn't mean.
But that's okay. It's a vulgarization of what they do, right? That's not a generalization. That's just because one channel does that about biology with biology does not mean that you can generalize that about anything that's going on anywhere else. I mean, look at Plato had his own academy. The idea of the university comes out of the guild, which was groups of scholars who taught more or less privately. That's how you got to Bologna, the first university ever built, because they just needed a building at some point where they could teach. And Nietzsche is perhaps a good example. He was a philologist and then left academia because he could no longer take it. And then you have other examples like Hegel, who was a professor, a full professor in Berlin, and before that served, I think, as a headmaster of a school, which is when he wrote The Science of Logic, and before that, The Phenomenology of Spirit. So you have all kinds of various examples. But it's not a guarantee that just because someone is in a university, even a full professor with tenure, or writing for some of the so-called best publishing houses, that their scholarship will be good.
No, of
Right.
course not.
So, and I think there's the problem of vulgarization is always there. In really any, and there's no guarantee that just because someone is at Oxford that they know anything. Right? I mean, there's almost a bit of a danger to simply look at the label. Oh, this is Harvard. This must be good, and unquestionably, yep.
It's liking a handbag just because it's Louis Vuitton, even though the stitching,
Yes.
The color might be ugly. I see what you mean, of course. But
the other question that you raised, which is more important, and I'll let you say something about that, which is the danger is that it turns into, everything can turn into entertainment, right? That's the danger. And The Machine Stops, a short story by E.M. Foster, is about this, actually. Or to some degree, it's about other things too. So that's one of the dangers, yes. But also the other important question you raised, which was, can someone be properly educated and formed as you would, for example, by studying philosophy at a university, on the internet? Or do we actually require physical space, right? The library and the peers, friends, classmates, professors that you talk to and that you disagree with and agree with, etc. So I think that was a crucial question you raised.
Well, listen, when I went to university, I was sort of surprised because, first of all, I didn't really think I deserved to be there. I was never a very good student in high school, and so when I got in, I was very surprised.
Yeah.
And I thought I was very intimidated by the whole thing. I thought that everybody was going to be really smart and really really well prepared, and I thought that the teachers were all going to be incomprehensibly brilliant. And when I got there, I sort of eased up because it's not really what I thought. I thought that a university was defined, its quality was determined by the quality of its teachers. That the better teachers were at the better universities, and that's why the universities were so great. And then I realized that it's not really the teachers, it's the quality of the students who attend the university, and it's the quality of the conversations you can have after class about class that are a determinant of a good university.
Yeah.
Because anyone could give you the basic Nietzsche spiel that they'll give any undergrad anywhere in the world. There's a certain academic consensus about what Nietzsche was meant to say, which gets challenged, of course, at the graduate level and PhD level. No one takes academic consensus as seriously there, but that's pretty much what an undergrad is supposed to be able to paraphrase in a paper, right? So most undergraduates will get the same thing said to them about Nietzsche or Kant or Hegel or any of these great philosophers in any university, but they won't get to talk about it with as brilliant students if they're not going to as good a university. I think that really is the difference. And that really, the best chats I had in university were 4 a.m. drunken chats about Kierkegaard with friends, or they were, very long conversations I had with my roommates. Those were where the insights really came. So I wonder if that wouldn't be lost a little bit by all these atomized people.
Yes.
The globe on the internet,
So why did you study philosophy?
I studied philosophy because I was raised as an atheist as a kid. My parents were sort of convinced with science and reason and the Enlightenment and its power to explain all things. And I was caught up in that philosophy, and I was pretty convinced of it. And I went to university because I love to talk to religious people and to try to have them see the error of their ways. So I'm the kind of person that would have 4-hour chats with Jehovah's Witnesses when they stop me in the street, or with Mormons, or I would stop priests in the street and I would try to argue with them and try to make my case for atheism.
Yeah.
And I thought I was pretty good at it, and I thought I could get even better at it if I went to university and learned philosophy and learned how to train my mind. And the more I studied religion and the more I studied philosophy, the less absurd it all became to me, and the less I wanted to disprove it. And also, I realized something very obvious, I think, to anyone who studies religion. It's that religious people can't be sort of mischaracterized as all being fundamentalists, as all being creationists, as all being people who take the letter of the text to be fact, or to be historical fact.
Yeah.
But that's how atheists tend to portray religious people a lot. You know, when you see someone like Chris Hitchens, or when you see someone like Richard Dawkins talking about religion, they're always debating some fundamentalist, always debating some creationist.
Yeah.
And the atheist has done his job, he thinks, most of the time, if you can just prove that there was no such thing as Noah's Ark, or that you couldn't possibly put all the animals of the world on some boat. And he thinks that once he's proved that, which is quite easy for a scientist to do, that he's done away with religion altogether, or done away with its importance. So that getting over that silliness was the first step in my intellectual sort of development. And I got very interested in philosophy, but also just the area of philosophy that deals with metaphysics, phenomenology, ultimate questions. That was my major, and my minor was religious studies, and I studied a lot of Buddhism and Hinduism. I think a lot of people who have been skeptical about monotheism in their youth have at some point an interest in the Eastern philosophies.
I mean, one point just en passant on Mr. Dawkins. The funny thing is that Dawkins is on the same level as the creationists, because the creationists read the Bible and say, "Oh, it's 7 days." Dawkins says, "Oh, it's 7 days," and the creationist says, "That's possible." And then Dawkins reads it and says, 7 days. That's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So they're talking on, weirdly enough, on the same plane, and they're actually making the same argument, but have different conclusions. So Dawkins is utterly incapable of understanding or having any kind of hermeneutical access to texts. That's also, by the way, he's not a scientist, it's scientism, right? It's the faith in science, as in science is just the method.
Yes.
That's what it is. It's a method. I mean, you must have learned this from Heidegger too. But then the
scientism is a method that has ambitions to be a system, and to be an all-encompassing, all-explanatory system. You know.
But why study philosophy? I mean, now, aside from your personal reason or experience, why would anyone study philosophy?
Well, I wanted to study something that was as difficult as it could be without it being math. I think that's really what was my motivation.
Yeah.
I've always been afraid of numbers, but I did want to set myself a very difficult challenge. And I think philosophy is the most difficult thing I could think of.
But what is it that philosophy, I mean, what is it that it is, right? I mean, you mentioned conversations.
Well, okay.
What happens when you philosophize? That's the question.
Well, I think that there are perhaps two dimensions to philosophy as I see it. The first one is a sort of cursory understanding of what philosophers have said. And that's what academia provides for you, I think, most of the time. you study the great minds, you study Nietzsche, you study Heidegger, you study all these guys, and you try to understand what they said. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult to just even get an idea of what they mean. But once you have that, an idea of what they mean, the infinitely more difficult task presents itself of figuring out whether or not they're right, whether or not what they say is actually true, whether what they say refers to reality in some sort of meaningful way. And that is a very difficult, very personal, and very, I would contend, intensely spiritual exercise. So that's really where all the meat of it happens. I'll put it this way. So, for instance, you might pore over Being and Time, and you might try to decipher what Heidegger means by being in the world, or by authenticity, right? But that really is quite meaningless unless the phenomenon of being in the world, as Heidegger describes it, actually presents itself to you. You have to beckon it. You have to beckon it to come, and it can come or it cannot.
Yes.
I think the event, the philosophical event that philosophers try to point you in the direction of, the direction that the task of writing philosophy is about, is to point you to certain phenomena.
Yeah.
You have to go and encounter. And if you can encounter them, I mean, that's all to your credit, but it's very, very difficult. When someone like Merleau-Ponty talks about the body's contact with nature, the inhabiting of the body in the world, that is also a phenomenon of that you can encounter or not. It's not enough to know that he said it, or it's not enough to be able to write a paper about it. You have to have lived it. And that's all philosophy tries to get you to do. It's to live increasingly true, increasingly noble, and increasingly intense experiences of reality and of truth.
Okay. So what you've said is that in philosophy, something about existence can or cannot, may or may not become transparent, visible.
Yes.
You use the old English word to beckon. It has to beckon, right? The phenomenon itself has to beckon to you. Being in the world needs to put Dasein itself back into the world. That's one of the projects of the book, of course, is to get the subject back out into the world. And I once had a student who said that at the end of reading the text, which is just 10 weeks in the UK, that was at university, who said, we're always told that we are isolated consumers who maximize utility. Right? That's who we are. That's who we're supposed to be. And here's someone saying that even this isolation is only possible because structurally what we are is being with others. You say Dasein, you've said being with others. There's no difference. And still, I would say to that, what you've described is getting to what a philosophical conversation also is, which sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't. You mentioned the 4 a.m. conversations, etc. Because then sometimes, and you can't guarantee, something becomes visible, something beckons, something shows itself of its own accord, to speak phenomenologically. And this showing itself reveals, let's say, a certain aspect of the truth. Never the entire truth, perhaps. And that's what occurs. That's the occurring of philosophy. Now, my question is again, does this happen to every student at university who studies philosophy, or is this something that perhaps can also occur? Because I think one of the important points that you made that I agree with is that it needs to fall on some soil, right? It needs to be, right? So you need to have some grounding. And the difficulty is, of course, if everything is moving more online, what universities are doing now. Universities are doing this now because of the virus. The question is, can because it won't be for everyone anyways, right? So you'll have people who read Plato all their life and they'll never have a single, proper thought with it, and those might be philosophy professors of all people. But then the question really is, what is it that not I don't want to talk about conditions that need to be fulfilled, because that's always artificial, right? Because you say we need to have this condition fulfilled and this condition fulfilled and then this and then this, and then we'll get to this promised land. No, what I'm trying to say is it possible to, so what would what it would have to look like, if you could speculate, perhaps, if you have something to say. If not, that's fine. Or what is it that one can do even outside of the university, after university, to continue down this path where something beckons? A lot of questions, but you can go anywhere with this.
Okay. As a philosopher, sometimes I have this fantasy of being like Diogenes in some sort of barrel, away from worldly ambition.
Yeah.
Because it's the ascete fantasy for me. It's divorcing myself from the world and devoting myself to just the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah.
And that, in some way, when I fantasize about that, it seems like a noble guise for a philosopher. That being said, I think a lot of people don't have it in them to do anything even resembling that. They want a career, they want a place in society, they want children, they want what everybody wants. And in that sense, when you try to milk your philosophical training for sort of worldly rewards, you find yourself vexed, because there's much of a market demand for it at all. It's not something that will make you all that wealthy, unless you're very crafty, like Jordan Peterson, and you know how to market yourself very well. So I think, if, in as much as you want your philosophy to serve you in a worldly sense, you're going to have to be very ingenious to make that work. In as much as you want it to serve you spiritually and personally and intellectually, it can do that to a staggering degree, almost limitlessly. You can do it your whole life. It's a lifelong pursuit. You're never done with it. You're never done getting better at it. Yes. So it's just it's up to your ambitions. I would contend, if you're a philosopher who reads, who's interested in religion, who's interested in mysticism, a philosopher who's interested in ultimate phenomena and ethics, if you dabble in that whole area of philosophy, you will have to transform alongside the philosophy that you read, lest it destroys you, lest its weight breaks your shoulders, because how much can you contemplate of the light without adjusting yourself to it? How much can you look at ideal behavior and at ultimate beauty, ultimate things, whilst staying the sort of wretch that you are? I think most of us who study philosophy have an inkling of this, of the burden of it. They say a professor of mine told me once that for a bodhisattva, a Buddhist enlightened being, to kill a fly on its arm, much more of an offense than for some brute to kill his neighbor, because the bodhisattva knows better. I think that really is what's so difficult about philosophy, is that the more you know, the more it is incumbent upon you to act better. An ethical dimension installs itself, which I don't think can be ignored and can be very painful. I know it tortures me, because I love the pleasures of life. I love to eat meat. I love to screw around and go partying. I love women. I love all of it. I love all the things I shouldn't love as a philosopher. And I know that it certainly is building up a reservoir of anxiety somewhere in my soul that will erupt at certain days. make me feel really terrible and about myself. Make me feel really terrible.
Yeah, well, that's a very specific burn. It's not the worst burn to have, is it?
Yeah, no, it's
Is
great.
it? I don't know.
But it's what I think one should be warned about this in philosophy, that you can't just treat it intellectually and academically forever and still do it right.
Exactly, but still, as you know, there are academics who treat this as a 9 to 5 job, and also what you're describing is, you could almost say, it's like it's a lucky strike. Whether someone is touched by philosophy in this way or not is not upon anyone to decide. Right.
Listen, I have met incredibly smart people who studied philosophy, who are some of the stupidest people I've ever met. And when I say that, I mean they were incredibly performant cognitively. You know, they probably had very high IQs, but they were very unwise about what the whole point of the endeavor was and what was interesting about it. In my sense, they were poring over details. I'm not gonna lie. I mean analytic philosophers when I say this.
Yeah, that's not even. Yeah.
We're not even go there. We're not even going to go there. But I think there's a really wrong way of doing it, which can be incredibly performant. So it's up to anyone. Some people I've met were not that performant, but very interested in interesting things.
Yeah.
And they were way more interesting to me than the former. I think what makes someone interesting is the kinds of things he's interested by. You know, the kinds of things that interest him. And I think that nitpicking over semantic details and sort of logical fallacies is more of a mathematical game than it is a philosophical one. I would put that closer to chess and Go than I would to actual philosophy. In some weird sense.
Well, it is called analyeo, right, which means to dissolve. Analytical philosophy dissolves what it touches. It certainly doesn't breathe the tragedy or the force of Nietzsche. It makes everything very sterile.
My father didn't even read. He studied philosophy in Oxford, and they didn't even read Nietzsche. They considered him a.
Not at that time. Well, now it's different. Now Nietzsche is everywhere, and Heidegger also. But of course, the trouble is who reads Heidegger, right? And what kind of soil does it fall onto? If it's Richard Dreyfuss, who then reads some kind of pragmatism into Heidegger, is a bit bonkers, to be honest. So yes, there needs to be some grounding. And I think the difficulty is that on some level, what university education does is it can provide this grounding or soil or something, whatever you would like to call it. But then again, it also is just always instrumental, and it's even more instrumental in countries where studying is very expensive. If you actually are, there is simply a customer mentality in the UK, probably also in the US, less so in Germany because it's free. But still, the credit point system that they rolled out all over Europe 10, 12 years ago, where you hunt credit points and you have to finish within 3 years or 3.5 years, is not the idea of studying. Where does the word school even come from, right? School comes from skole, which we translate as leisure, usually. And Humboldt had the idea that we could have the university as a place, and I think this would be your ideal university too, where, to quote him, this is a quote from him, and he was a Prussian bureaucrat. He said, taking seminars is a minor matter. What's important is a healthy loneliness and like-minded peers. That's the university you've described. That's what it's there for. That's what it should be there for. It provides the spatio-temporal occurrence for a certain time that's limited, must be limited, there must be a limit to it, there must be also some way of perhaps, having exams and writing papers, where you need to have conversations with your peers about, because it's also in writing, writing is a form of thinking. It's quite important to write and form one's thoughts in such a manner.
Well, I agree with you when it comes to the humanities. The humanities should be that. Because, some degrees have very worldly consequences, some people have very worldly ambitions. If you study engineering, you're preparing yourself for engineering, for a job. A lot of degrees prepare you for a job, and those should, they should be left to shape that however they see fit. When it comes to the humanities, I totally subscribe to Humboldt's vision, because I really believe that there is something magical that happens when thought is freed from use, from its telos, if you will. Thought that is teleological has no magic to it. It has
thought that's instrumental.
That's instrumental. That's right.
Perhaps, yeah.
Thought that is marshaled for its own sake has this magical quality to it, because what you seek is nothing but edification and wisdom. There's something noble in that. There's something noble in expending that much effort for the sake of something which will give you no rewards in the world whatsoever. Some might call it stupid.
Rather the opposite. It's rather the opposite.
Yeah.
Not merits that you get, well, something else. So yes, thought that just occurs for itself.
Yes. For thought's sake, much like there was art for art's sake in the 19th century. I love thought for thought's sake. I think that the best thoughts come in that mode, because it's quasi-religious. Think about it. All the things that we don't treat instrumentally are attached with a certain aura of sacredness.
Yes.
If one says that one goes to an exhibit, an art exhibit, in order to be up to date with the zeitgeist, one thing, he makes himself look like an idiot. Right? He makes himself look like someone who's not very cultivated. People go to see exhibits because they're beautiful, and that's why the only reason they go for the sake of the art. It's not treated instrumentally, and in as much as it is, it's made fun of. Same thing for church. If someone goes to church in order not to go to hell, I find that less worthy than someone going to church because he wants to be in communion with his deity, or because he wants to celebrate his love for his deity. That's two different motivations, one of which I think is better and more religious. Same thing with the academy for me. I think that those who go to the academy for the sake of just being edified are doing it better than those who are in it for a job, or have more future-looking sort of
credentials, etc. Yes. So that's what we need to build. We need to build this ideal university of often for thought, a sacred place. That's quite important.
I want to bring it closer to the sacred and less, and away from the merely academic. I think that's where the humanities need to go. I think they need to be invested with this magical quality that I think once they used to be. I think universities used to be. We've lost.
I agree. I mean, so for example, you look at, I've got two green books here. One of them is by Paul Natorp, and one of them is by Fichte. So this is philosophische Systematik, philosophical systematicity. Natorp is the man who helped bring Heidegger when he was a young scholar to Marburg, where Heidegger's first philosophy position was, a university position. And when you read this was a lecture course given to students. Incredible. There are no longer lecture courses like this. The beauty of this text I can't even begin to describe. Is And the same is true, of course, with some of Heidegger's lecture courses that he gave. And so much of that is lost because of the way that now everything has to be evaluated, right? So you can go to a certain university and they will teach the same course every single year. It'll always be early modern philosophy, the history of analytical philosophy, some Nietzsche, some Hegel, some Heidegger, but it'll never be, not anymore at least, these original lectures which were written. And so it's, and this is also where for to a large degree for academics, where this feeling of a burden comes from, an unbearable burden when it comes to teaching, because teaching is no longer one with their research. This was written by someone by hand and then presented, lectured, read to his students, who responded to the lectures in the seminars or in questions. And then Paul Nature would go back and make changes and then continue writing the lecture for the next week or the next whatever, next month, whatever the next lecture would be. And this very often no longer takes place because now we have PowerPoint presentations and they're always basically you're teaching the same stuff every year and you adapt it to make it a bit simpler. I sometimes say to students at university, just, if I make PowerPoint, you don't have to come, just read Wikipedia. It's easier, it's cheaper, and it's much more effective. You don't even have to come here. And one of the things that, that's showing with online education through universities now is very often you don't even have to go. But what you said is so this attempt to bring back, you called it magic, this, the sacredness of thought, whatever that exactly may be. I think what you mean by this, because I know from other conversations we had, is that there's something that happens in thought that you said once, it's an apparition of thought. There's something that opens up when we properly think. And I think what opens up there is that's world, right? That's world. Because then there's meaning. Meaning just, yes, oh, that's meaningful, right? So the exact opposite of we usually talk about. But this is what you say could and should be taught at proper university level, if there were such a place still.
I think one thing I've learned about meaning in studying philosophers is that the problem is not to find it. The problem is to extract it and receive it and understand it. Meaning can spring forth with that and be a total mystery to you. You can be completely blind to it. I think of, for instance, classical music. I love classical music, I do, but it also frustrates me because I know that I understand very little of it. I know that there's a wealth of meaning that's brimming with it, but I don't have the tools, I don't have the aptitude, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the ear, I don't have the mind for it to receive it as gloriously as someone who's devoted his life to this music could. A great composer, a great pianist, a great musician. They probably get so much more out of it. So for me, the problem is not, it's not finding meaning. I know where to find it. You go to Bach, you go to Beethoven, you go to Heidegger, you go to Plato, you go to any great artist, you will find the meaning. The meaning's there for you to find. The problem is to receive it correctly. I think that's what takes immense training and immense diligence.
That's true. There is this need for formation, for Bildung. But the question that we've touched upon that we can't conclusively answer, I think, but that's an important question to keep coming back to, is what would proper Bildung, what would proper formation, self-formation look like anyways, now within or without the university? Because one of the things that digitalization does is constant distraction. And one of the things that we keep coming back to is, you can call it idleness, you can refer to it as stillness, or now the world has paused, as we said at the beginning. So there's a sense of stillness now and a sense of calm. Even, you're in West London, I'm in East London. usually what's around us where we respectively are is madness, and now it's completely quiet day and night, and it's very peaceful. Actually, I didn't expect it to be that peaceful as well, and it's the people are quite friendly. So when you go outside, and it's this no sensation of a post-apocalyptic, pre-apocalyptic scene or anything. No, but what I'm trying to say, I think, in terms of stillness and this calmness, is that that's required. That's perhaps required, and it doesn't matter then whether you're inside a university or not, or outside. Is that it needs this suspendedness, the suspense from external pressures, bureaucratic, technocratic, whatever demands, and then thought can happen. Because you also said, it's being a flaneur professionnel. That's when you think, as Nietzsche says, only trust the thought that comes to you in walking.
Mm. Mm. Yes, quite right. I think it's very hard to think properly when you're doing it to stave off criticism from your parents, or you're doing it to ensure comfort in your lifestyle a few years down the line. You the ether doesn't seem to reward schemes, unfortunately.
that's a slogan. You've got to. That's got to be your first collection of aphorisms. The ether doesn't seem to reward schemes. That's the first line in the book you have to write now. Where's that coming from?
I don't know.
I don't know. The ether? Is it the ether? I remember when we met. It took us, I think, 27 seconds until you said the word, and then the cosmos is opening up, and everything just pours out from this meaningful splendor, or something like that. So there we are again. The ether. The ether. That's a word we need to get back to too. The ether, right?
Mm.
I haven't thought of the ether enough, but it's a magnificent concept.
I love it.
What does it mean to you?
To me, it means that rarefied air where the most brilliant thoughts happen. It's ether is it's the theater of my mind, but the nobler heights of it.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah.
And when I conceive of my mind, I think of an earth and a sky, if you will. And everything chthonic refers to my passions and my body and my and everything in the upper reaches is the ether, and that's where the gods live and the heroes and the...
But there is very often in these situations there's this sensation of oneness, isn't there? It isn't Mr. Descartes. It isn't I who thinks of I. It is actually the death of I, and then this thinking occurs, and you're pulled up and down at the same time.
Quite right. Well, that's an insight Heidegger helped me unlock very potently. It was the idea that, and to a certain degree, the Buddhists as well, like Zen Buddhism, is all about this. A lot of it has to do with this. It's that transcendence is a sort of absorption in a task, and that there is, and that the death of the ego occurs when you're acting without thinking, spontaneously and poetically. So when you think of the work of a craftsman who's lost in study and in work, well, he can maybe sustain his focus for a few minutes, maybe a few hours, but he can't wake up and live that way, as if that was his mode of being. He can focus himself for short periods of time, and that's where he finds a lot of the times all sorts of meaning. The craftsman loves his work and loves being in his workshop and loves tinkering with his things, and he's doing something that he feels is useful and meaningful in that moment, because he is. It's great what anyone who's absorbed that way. That's what athletes look for in sport, or dancers look for in dance, or intellectuals in reading. I think that this sort of total absorption in a difficult task, to the point of losing yourself in it, is at least for me a sort of transcendence, a sort of transcendence that is available to anyone without being a great mystic. I think anyone who has discipline and dedicates themselves to something to which they're passionate will have a glimpse of something truly meaningful, truly good, truly worthy of praise, and something commendable. I think anyone can do that. Anyone who focuses at anything difficult for any long period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
so,
yeah, go on.
So yeah, that is a form of ego death, I think. Let's say when you're playing tennis and you're totally absorbed, if you think about yourself hitting the ball, it will throw off your rhythm and you'll lose that point. The best tennis player has no notions of self, no notions of ego, no notions of anything but where the ball is going.
Following the ball.
Yes. And in that moment, he is a tennis player. He is tennis.
He is tennis itself. Yes.
He is tennis itself. Yes.
Yeah.
He's not just tennis. He has become tennis.
Yeah. I have become tennis.
Yeah.
That's another good line from an 80s film that was never filmed. That we should retroactively film and make. Well, we could use this time for this. But you mentioned the word before, ecstatic, and then that what this crisis could lead to after it's over, that it leads to a bit of an ecstatic period, but hopefully not in the sense of just more consumerism and more just going out and buying stuff and filling the void again in that manner. But I mean, it's unprecedented what's occurring, which is why it's so difficult to say anything about it. But perhaps it is ecstatic then, in the sense that it brings back a certain focus too, because you know
what it does. You know what it does? It makes you excited to see strangers again. This Corona thing. When you walk around and everything's all right, and everything's right with the world. Other people in the subway seem like like they're in your way, or the crowds become heavy and unpleasant, and one sort of develops this slight misanthropy living in a city. But the other day I went to the shopping market, and I was just genuinely excited to see people because I've been isolated for so long. It was nice, and they were excited to see me, and there was so much courtesy going on, and people were nice to each other. And I think that you don't miss things until they're gone. And strangers have been cut out of my life. I don't see as much strangers as I used to, and I sort of miss them in a way. So that's nice. Maybe people will be excited to see each other again after this Corona.
Well, as the Queen said, this is a time to slow down. And her last words were, "We will meet again."
Mm-hmm.
But it is a time to slow down, to just say the obvious. Right? But then again, the hope is that the camera is not sharp again. The hope is that the world that will be birthed from this is a new one. That's my hope. My hope is that it will be one of less certainty, but more poetry, to speak in very weak slogans, but one of where the ether, where we're in touch with the ether, rather than with total work and career and focusing on, and also, of course, it probably isn't, but perhaps an end to financialization and capitalism, etc. But that's maybe wishing for too much. I don't know.
when I think about the end of capitalism, I'm excited until I start considering its alternatives, uh, and then my enthusiasm weakens.
Well, yeah, but the alternatives, I mean, that's a different topic to discuss some other time. And I think that the what will come off capitalism is not anything we know.
Mhm.
So because those alternatives you mean, they've been tried and they won't come. They are forms of the same thing, because what they do is they look at means of production over human beings. They look at producibility and manipulation over nature and humans. And if anything, what yeah, but that's a different topic to discuss. I think what we should continue on at some point is really this question again of what education could and should look like, and what its task is,
Mhm.
and how proper self-formation, self-cultivation is possible.
I think the humanities will be strengthened if you instill in students the notion that there is actually something that there's that is promised to them if they're serious about their studies, and that something has
Yeah,
sacred character to it, that what they'll be learning throughout their studies is something which you should treat
yeah,
with all of the seriousness that it deserves. And you learn progressively how serious your subject matter is. You don't know it from the start. You sort of discover it progressively. And then it dawns upon you that what you're studying is not ephemeral, is not merely
yes.
sort of historically passed down abstractions, that there's an actual soil,
Yeah.
ontological soil to which all of these things
And
refer.
this that what the humanities should teach and have always taught until very recently is, again, a slogan, is the meaning of life. Because they do, because as you put it, they're not just abstractions being handed down and secondary, tertiary, whatever source said this and this and this about this. No, there's a necessity and a consequence to every way of thinking, right? And this is articulated in literature, in poetry, in painting, in sculpture, in philosophy, of course, as well, and in religion, obviously, as well too, as well. It's what we're so. What I think what you said, if you want to have just one sentence, is what humanities departments should perhaps do again is to be bolder and braver again, or just return to what they always
And
what
more
you,
ambitious, more
sorry.
ambitious. When you more the academia should become more ambitious than it is today, I think. When you read someone like Hegel,
Yeah,
you're baffled by the sheer ambition of his philosophical project. It's unimaginable to me when I read it that it was unimaginable to me that he was actually serious about what he was writing. He wanted to build, if I'm not mistaken, a bridge to God, basically, between man and God, using dialectical reason. I don't know of any scholars today who have such ambitions.
no, but look,
A lot.
yes, exactly, but this is
This is
getting it.
indicative of German scholarship. This is,
Well,
for me,
that's
German.
that's gone. They've all given up. But the thing is that that's about ego, right? So, what's happening in German departments? I mean, in German philosophy departments is, for the most part, you have big egos who don't want to stand on the shoulders of giants, which is why they're turning towards analytical philosophy, because it's easier. You can write more papers, etc. They've totally given up on continuing Hegel, Fichte, Kant, Heidegger, Nietzsche, etc. And it's got to do, I think, a lot with ego and wanting to be recognized by the Anglophone world. So that's maybe a problem. But then also there was still something, we're just a silly age. We're a silly, ironic age. We're distanced. We're aesthetically distanced from reality. We're aesthetically distanced from anything that could matter. That's the trouble. That's the real, I think, issue, is that we don't take philosophy seriously. And Hegel, of course, in Heidegger and Nietzsche, they take it seriously. Hegel doesn't write an interesting theory, right? Hegel consciously writes this bridge towards God, and I would say he consciously, and he knows this, finalizes, completes the project of metaphysics. I mean, this is where they were, because Hegel, who was friends and roommates with Hölderlin and Schelling when they were students in Tübingen, can you imagine? And they read Heraclitus, who said, hen kai pan, one and many, and out of one many, and out of many one. How can we solve this riddle, this mystery? And they had different responses to it. Hegel's was the completion of metaphysics in the science of logic and in the encyclopedia, and then of course also building this bridge, of the world spirit and man and God. But that was a genuine ambition. Then you had someone like Nietzsche, and you had someone like Heidegger afterwards. But now the ambition is to be recognized now by peers, or to be published, or to just have a job very often. And that's the ambition very often now. It's just to have a position, but not to write the philosophy for the 21st century. And of course the century, because what the philosophy does, philosophy thinks, at least in our age, very far ahead, because that's a kind of civilization, or whatever you want to call this, that we now live in, which is global, planetary, extremely interconnected, and so it has to look ahead to what's coming.
Yeah, it does. And one can wonder legitimately today, with the advent of the internet, whether or not the task of education will totally be relegated to the internet someday. I mean, it's been so important since it's emerged, and the world has shifted towards it so fast. One could imagine that in 50 years, 100 years, the task of education is solely put in the hands of the internet.
Yeah.
And then what? How will it be better? Or will it be worse? I think that in a way that's kind of futile way of asking the question. I think it just will be different, better in some ways and worse in others. For every new every technological advancement, something is gained and something is lost. Think about the telephone. When the telephone came on, you had the ability to speak to people who were very far away instantaneously. It was a great rapprochement of people. The world seemed much smaller, and that's great. It's great that you could have such instantaneous intimacy with whoever you want. But the art of writing letters was kind of lost, and so much went into writing a letter, so much thought and effort, and there were concerns of calligraphy, and the paper had to be right, and the ink had to be nice, and it had to be signed beautifully, it had to be sealed.
Yeah.
A lot of the times there's a whole crafting of letters which conveys so much emotion and thought and consideration, or not, and that could be read into the letter as well.
Yeah.
All of that is lost. And that's a shame. It's a shame. There's something human about how we used to communicate, which is lost, for the purpose of gaining something new. Now, every new piece of technology does this, in that it sort of makes one aspect of our life better while just completely obliterating something else that we liked. So the question that's interesting it's interesting to ponder what education might look like, what would be gained and what would be lost by it completely being sort of handed over to the internet.
Yeah. Yes, and that's for another time, perhaps, to ponder. I think, though, that's a really important. I think it's genuinely one of the most important questions to ask. Because it's about, when we say the word self-formation, we're not saying there is a self that's already there and that's just kind of cultivating itself. No. Self-cultivation, self-formation is how can a self be formed so that there is a well-formed human being at the end of this, and not just some confused heap, human heap of desires and and uh, and and wants that then is very easily exploitable. So I think that's for another time. If you want to add anything, speak now or be silent until next time, which is next week. But yeah.
No, I think I'll let it sit and come back to this discussion because there's certainly a lot of interesting things to be said about it. I'll try to gather my thoughts and we'll come back to this discussion.
Yeah. So this was a proper peripatos, meandering peripatos, taking a walk in thought in the tradition of Aristotle, which is one way of approaching philosophy. It's certainly not the only one, but what is required for it is years and years and years of study before. That's I think very important to appreciate that absolute necessity. That in order to say, before you say anything, you have to read and focus and the kind of lose sight of much else. So yeah, thank you, Kubilai.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I'll see you very soon.
Yep.